We go from the earliest stage to how do we scale up, and I'm thrilled to have Ellie Brunsdale, who's going to be the moderator for this panel, introduce it on first-of-a-kind projects. Ellie, come on up.
Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to kick off the opening panel, the Keynote panel, which will focus on strategies for scaling first-of-a-kind clean energy solutions. We'll be digging in to what goes into developing next-generation geothermal energy projects with Brightcore and Fervo Energy, as well as learning about what is needed to bring critical metals refining to the U.S. through waste mining with N-Cycle. I'll invite the panelists to start coming to the stage, and the way that we're going to structure this is panelists will first introduce themselves and their company, and then we'll move into a moderated discussion, followed by audience Q&A. We're going to be polling from questions submitted to the app, so if you have not yet downloaded the app, would suggest you do it now, and you have the ability to also upvote questions that others have submitted. Before jumping in, I'll quickly introduce myself. I'm Ellie Brunsdale, and I'll be moderating this discussion. I started my career in clean energy here at Yale, and it feels great to be back on campus among friends and mentors. Since Yale, I've been working in deploying utility-scale and distributed solar, wind, and battery storage projects, first at D.E. Shaw Renewable Investments, and then later at Greenbacker Capital, where I also led a first-of-a-kind investment into electric vehicle infrastructure. Most recently, I've been consulting for investors and companies to help drive commercialization and deployment of sustainable technologies and infrastructure. So with that, Mike will invite you to come up and kick us off here. Everyone, hand of applause, Mike. Great.
Thank you. Just want to make sure I got this thing going here. Yep. I'm the official clicker for the event. Am I going the right way, everyone? Any tech help? We're a tech company, and here I go. Well, I can just start, but I would love to get some of the slides up. I'm hitting the forward, and there's a little bit of a... There we go, baby. All right. So I'll quickly go through this. We've got about 10 minutes apiece, and I first just want to say I'm thrilled. Stu, thank you for inviting us. Josh, doing amazing things here. We've been working with Julie Zimmerman, and just an absolute thrill for us to be here. So I'll get to this quickly because there's some really, the calls leading up to this were fascinating, and I didn't even understand what we were doing, the first of its kind. This is what we've been doing for 10 years, so it doesn't feel like the first of its kind all the time to me. But it's absolutely, when you go to the marketplace, there's a lot of headwinds because it just isn't out in the marketplace a lot. So let me just quickly start. This is what pretty much everybody's going to go through. I'll start off by giving a little bit of a context on who I am and why I'm even talking to you and what my company, Brightcore Energy, does. I have a really bit of an unconventional route, and it's weird to even think that I have to explain it. It's just been my life, but I was a professional athlete for 15 years in New York City. I lived a life outside of that too as a young kid and everything else, and I always had an interest in the environment. And as I got older, starting to see enormous demand on resources and that kind of intersection of finance and limited resources seems like a good equation. So I always had the idea of going into something not necessarily in clean energy, but in the environment. And I was really fortunate to be able to come back as an undergrad here at 38. A little bit easier in some ways, but I'd be going home and changing diapers at the time, so there was different challenges. And I want to say that I actually took a couple classes at the Yale School of Forestry that got SPATH, and Capitalism and the Environment was the class that really got me. And it started talking about climate change. This is 2005, 6. And just how the capital markets and NGOs and government policy have to align. It's that challenge of our time. And so I met a man by the name of Stephen Kellert, who was retiring from the School of Forestry then. He had a great deal of knowledge in the built environment, and we started a private equity shop in New York. It was an incredible thing. We kind of got washed out in that 2010 downturn. But we had iterated a lot into project finance coming up. And really, my company, Bright Core Energy, right now, I bought into it about 12 years ago, two founding partners, one of which is a School of Management grad. This was their vision. Can we use the capital markets to get new technology out there to not just decarbonize, but improve buildings? So there is this kind of, you optimize your performance as an athlete. We're doing the same thing to buildings. It's really commercial industrial that we focus on, not residential. And we do three things. We do lighting and small efficiency plays, like boring things, like little motors and whatnot in buildings that actually have a profound difference. Solar, commodity, lots of people do it, but there's a real need for it. And geothermal, this is ground source geothermal, heat exchange. Nora's going to speak about deep geothermal that creates electricity. This is simply moving BTUs around. So what is the problem that we're trying to solve? And I'll get into that quite quickly. Look at this chart here, right? I mean, I could do every LED in the country. And surprisingly, we're still working right now with New York Power Authority, and there are hundreds of schools in Manhattan right now that do not have any kind of LEDs or any kind of control. So there's still a need for it. But it's representing 10 to 20% of the building's energy draw. That's not going to move the needle. If you look at this, 40 to 60% of a typical building energy use goes to heating and cooling. That's the problem we're trying to solve. So, the elephant in the room had been for those first couple of years HVAC. And what did we do? This is a pretty rudimentary drawing of what it is, but you're just leveraging the ambient temperature of the ground. It is a radiator in the ground. If you put your warm hand on a cold beer, there is a heat exchange that goes back and forth. Your hand cools down, the beer warms up. That's what we're doing in the ground. The Earth's temperature is constantly 55 around this latitude and longitude. And so you think about the thermal lift that has to happen in a building like this. If you want it 70 degrees in the winter, you're moving it 15 degrees from 55. In the summertime, you have 55 that you can actually, you're almost getting free air conditioning. So this is what really excited me about geothermal. The coefficients of the performance it is simply the best way to heat and cool a building. But there's enormous challenges in doing it. If everybody could have it and it was cheap, sure, we'd all be doing it. But it's a real narrow applicability. There's not a lot of work done in the retrofit market where, say, a place like New York City, 80% of the buildings are going to have to be retrofitted. They're going to be here in the next 30 years. You're not just going to blow up the Empire State Building and put a LEED platinum building in this place. You have to change the guts of that building. And if you're just doing lighting, we're not going to get there. But it also requires really customized solutions. This is not a product that I can stick at all kinds of different places. You have to either bespoke, and they're very customized. We're going to talk about that in the project that we're doing at Yale. And finally, it's a really, whoops, I must have hit that. I got excited. Sorry, guys. It's a disaggregated industry, and that speaks to this slide. There are all kinds of trades involved in this. You have designers, you have financiers, you have drillers, you have all kinds of construction work. So what is Folk was first of its kind about this industry is that we changed the business model. We integrated everything. We made it turnkey, which sounds kind of easy, but it turned out to be incredibly difficult. We started out, and Dave, our head designer, is in the room. We started out with better design capabilities. Europe is about 2 decades ahead of us, and we're transferring a lot of their knowledge and experience across the Atlantic into using it in North American markets. Very specifically up in PSEB we'll talk about. But we model and design in a very sophisticated way. What we found was we thought, well, we can finance these things, we can model them, and we'll just farm out the boots on the ground. Not a chance, because the sophistication of our design entailed that we have sophistication in execution, and we didn't have it. So we invested very heavily in drilling equipment, which I'll show you in a moment. That's the design. And so I'm not sure, that thing's supposed to rotate. One of these things is very, very cool. But we can design a solution in such a manner that we can actually get inside existing buildings like this if the operating system here needed to be replaced. That is a game changer because it opens up the addressable market tenfold. We can also do it in new builds, which is typical, but we can do it on angles and space-constrained locations. So that, to me, is a real difference maker. You'll see a bunch of the equipment that we have is absolutely vital. It's expensive, it's time-consuming, it's very difficult to find workers to do this. I can buy all the equipment in the world. If I don't have somebody to run it, I'm in trouble. And Julie Zimmerman and Yale University has been really good about starting to think about how we get workforce development. We can get into that in a second. In the last slide, we'll talk about it a bit. But the urban geo that we are talking about is an example, and I'll show you a slide in about 2 minutes about what we're capable of doing, kind of seeing is believing. The last aspect of this, though, is monitoring. I can tell you all the great things that geo is going to do. If I do not have data and I do not have numbers, this is fiction. And now we're starting to monitor these things, the O&M, the operations and maintenance. We come in there and we think we're the best thing since sliced bread. An old school that knows how to run this system. We've been doing a lot of work with the former head of Princeton. And he said, look, man, my operators don't want to talk to you. We are not going to be beta testing something that may be great in the future. It's binary. This thing works or it doesn't. So we really have to de-risk these things. And this is a game changer for the industry. So I'll get into how it applies at Yale University. But this is typically the integrated series of silos that you have to go through. And we've tried to put them all together. So there is that easy button that you hit, right? The way Target is. You talk to us, we can design it. We can tell you right from the beginning for free whether this is a go or no go. In the end, we are selling savings. This thing either works and lowers your bottom line or it does not. We want all the decarbonation in the world, but it's got to make financial sense. This is an example of what is first of a kind in North America. We were able to go to the Beresford at 81st and Central Park West. It's a 125-year-old building. We were able to slip this little guy in the freight elevator, make a gantry system, take out what was the coal room, which became the oil room and is now the geothermal room. They're saving 45% on their common area costs, and they're diminished their carbon footprint by about the same. That used to run on coal, then oil. Now it is very, very small amount of electricity to run those pumps. Really cool. So what's first of a kind at Yale? Basically everything. Every headwind that we have in the industry is on Science Hill. And we are so thrilled to be part of it and scared and learning. So on your dime. No, we have gotten so much better because of the hoops that we have to jump through. Our drilling team, our design team. It has been a profound change because if we want to have a customized solution for this university or that particular building, we have to know about that building. We don't. We know how to drill. Yale University knows about Yale and what their needs are and what their limitations are. And so it's been a real partnership that I'll talk about in a second. But the other thing is space constraint, as I talked to you before. The property lines outside where we had to drill were incredibly tight. So as soon as we start deviating even a little bit, you're putting boreholes down that can go 850 feet. If you're off by a percentage, you're in your neighbor's house, and that's a problem. So we really had to be very accurate about that. So every bit of skill, this thing may rotate. There you go. That is the bore field. And if you look, this is not a typical design. They're usually 20 feet at center. That means you need about a football field or two to get the thermal mass you need to heat and cool a building. We are able to do it. The perforations in the surface are very, very small. We designed something for Malone Hall that instead of being a rugby field on the surface, it is truly not a bowling alley, but a bowling lane. They're 5.5 feet at center, and they come out on angles, very, very accurate angles on where these things place, so there's no thermal, what do you call it, thermal creep, right? So that one borehole is not influencing another in terms of its therms. This is game-changing for the industry, so it's very, very difficult. It's very complex, and to drill that is very, very hard. So we're extraordinarily proud about it. It's 262 boreholes in a space that is about 60% less than what a typical bore field would be. So that bowling lane accesses a thermal mass of a rugby field 800 feet down. That's kind of the beauty of this thing. The other thing that we have is a thermal battery, BTES, borehole thermal energy storage. We can preload individual boreholes, those lines. This one, that one, this one. Why? Because we have 15-minute interval data, and we know tomorrow that the temperature is going to fall 17 degrees Fahrenheit. So we throw the energy in those holes, pull it out tomorrow in the peak. In that picture I told you about Central Park West, they are getting time of use pricing reductions because they're shaving peak. They're big energy users. That kind of accuracy and the monitoring that goes with it's game-changing. The execution was extraordinarily hard, and I think I'm probably running out of time, so I want to hear the rest of the panel. But I will tell you the big challenge was there's 18 other trades here. We're bumping into everybody in extremely aggressive time horizon to get this thing in, get the other trades. All of this stuff makes sense in terms of federal funds coming and all that. So we had to be very, very accurate about what we're capable of doing and staying on that schedule. And Yale has made us absolutely a better enterprise. The big thing, though, and we knew this going in, but we didn't know how hard it was. The Connecticut River Valley has very specific sticky clay. And if anybody walked by that field, it turns into basically Play-Doh. It's everywhere. It's on your shoes. It's in your nose. It is everywhere. We had to develop a system just to get the spoils out so that we could actually return the water to deep standards, the criteria that they have for kind of flushing the water through the system. And it was a bear to do. It made us behind schedule, which made the rest of the thing behind schedule, which made Mike Schreier very angry, which made me very scared, and we fixed it. So it was a really cool thing that we were able to do. Finally, operations and maintenance I mentioned. We have put so much time and energy and money into this that now we have a 10-year performance guarantee. And so this is a first in the industry. We are guaranteeing the thermal mass, the BTUs that the contract says. We'll legally have to supply these things. So we're at risk, not Yale. We're de-risking it for our clients and ourselves by the accuracy that we're able to bring. If you can imagine this campus, how much infrastructure is underground, when you're doing that borehole, you better be accurate. Whoops, I'm a little behind here, guys. Sorry about that. So what do we need to scale? We need to change the model. We need to have this integrated approach. We have to lower time, we have to lower risk, and we have to lower price. That'll come with scale. But to me, the biggest thing is really the unforeseen challenges, the specific needs. You have to marry that partner. This is no longer Yale hiring a vendor. I'll just leave you with this thought. This is very much a marriage. A little bit corny, but honestly, we were talking about partnering with Yale. And this never would have gotten off the ground unless we could have iterated many, many times, because the conventional model would not have sufficed. And we learned, even in a design coming in, what's possible. If you do not get the certain amount of BTUs, that 40% ITC, 40% of the projects being paid for by the federal government, you weren't eligible for it. So having this thing right, understanding what the parameters are, and jumping through the hoops that Yale said is absolutely critical, or we're never going to scale. So it really has to be a custom-made solution, and you have to have a partner on the other side that is willing to partner with you. So thank you so much, guys. I look forward to your questions.
Hi, everyone. I'll make it more conversation. I'll stay down here. So I'm Allie Weigel. I'm the Chief of Staff at Ncycle, critical mineral refining company. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means. But before I do, so as the Chief of Staff, my role is to really support cross-functional projects, to kind of prioritize and amplify my CEO's priorities across our organization, and really be the kind of unblocker in chief, if you will. So I see everything across our engineering team, our finance team, business development, and really making sure that the ship runs smoothly. So in that context, we think a lot about our strategy as a company and kind of the challenges that we are trying to solve. So I think to best frame what Ncycle is doing, it's good to understand really the challenge around the critical mineral supply chain today. So I'm sure that many of you in this audience are well aware the critical mineral supply chain is pretty imbalanced at the moment. So most of the materials are available around the world. We see everything from mined products to recycled content available globally. But the actual processing and refining of that material happens predominantly in Asia. About 80% of these materials are refined in China specifically. And so that imbalance causes, obviously, national security risks for many countries, including the US. It causes supply chain risks for companies trying to stand up this clean energy economy and this clean economy in general. And so this is really something that we need to urgently solve and solve quickly. So at Ncycle, we are really trying to develop we are developing a refining solution, not a refinery. So what do I mean by that? So when you think about traditional refining Traditional refining is hugely capital intensive. It takes up a substantial land footprint. It has massive permitting challenges to overcome, and it's pretty inflexible. So most refineries are made to ingest certain types of feedstock, and they produce only a couple of outputs. They're also predominantly pyrometallurgic processes, so they are pretty carbon intensive as well. So just many, many challenges facing traditional refining that would preclude that type of system from being stood up in, say, the US or other countries around the world. And so at Ncycle, when we were thinking about our technology, we were really trying to design to address these challenges. It was a real systems engineering approach, if you will. So we looked at that massive footprint and said, okay, we need to design something that's much smaller. And we looked at the permitting challenges and we said, okay, well, we need to then design something that doesn't need greenfield engineering. We looked at that inflexibility and we said, okay, we need to design something that can be flexible and nimble to the changing demands for different materials, whether it's nickel, cobalt, manganese, looking forward into rare earths with dysprosium and all of these materials that we're need today urgently, but are going to need in the future. So that's what we really designed, and what you're seeing on the screen here is our first-of-a-kind solution, if you will. So we call it the Oyster, and so what we are really doing is building a electrochemical process where our secret sauce is in that orange piece. It's in our cells. And so it's an electrochemical process, so it does not rely on burning of natural gas and that pyrometallurgic system. What we're doing here is really passing, call it dissolved solids through a sponge and outputting either a mixed hydroxide precipitate or a pure metal. And I say either of those because it could be a nickel cobalt MHP, or it could be pure copper metal, or it could be cobalt metal. So again, we're solving for that flexibility. The benefit here in the size of this system, traditional refining is called the size of a Costco. It could be 20 acres big. It is a massive land mass. This system is about the size of your average grocery store. It's about, call it 30 to 40,000 square feet. It's modular, so we can really scale with our partners. So if we are looking at a shredding facility in the US, so lithium-ion battery shredding facility, and they have a certain amount of batteries that they're seeing today, but they're projecting out, 20-fold, 30-fold into the future because we expect the EV battery market to be at a very different place in several decades than it is today. We can scale with them. We don't need to build a massive system that is unprofitable in the near term so that it can be profitable in the future. And then again, the last part of this is it's clean. So we are relying on electricity rather than combusting natural gas to produce these materials. So this system was built in 2017. It is operating today, and we anticipate just continuing to grow this into the future. I think something that Mike brought up is, what are the challenges facing these technologies? And for us, one of the biggest things we see is really price manipulation. So when you think about critical minerals, one of the things that happens today is the feedstocks, so again, recycled lithium-ion batteries or mined material from across the world, those feedstock prices are manipulated by either flooding markets or causing some kind of a price or a export ban or something to that effect. That causes a lot of volatility in this market. Vice versa, we'll see like a depression of metals markets that is really squeezing that margin. So it's squeezing the difference between the feedstock price and the price that we can get for our final products, where we really operate. Luckily, we're seeing a lot of tailwinds, both domestically in the U.S., but also in the EU, in the EU and in Australia and elsewhere around the world. So the market is listening, both private sector and public sector, to the challenges that need to be overcome in order to stabilize this market. So I guess in close, these materials are truly the bedrock of not only clean energy, but the clean economy in general. And I'm just incredibly grateful to be able to spend my day-to-day working on bringing this solution to market.
Hi, everyone. My name is Noor Gadanfar, and I'm Chief of Staff at Fervo Energy. While my slides are being put up there, we were asked to talk a little bit about our past and what drove us to get to work on first-of-a-kind projects. And I've had a bit more of a career jungle gym than a career ladder. I started off, I went to school at McGill University in Montreal, and I double majored in sociology and international development. Quickly realized upon graduation that there are not a ton of jobs in sociology that you could really pursue. And actually, upon the recommendation of a friend, they said, you know, a lot of these like consulting companies don't really care about your background. They're more interested in the way you think. And so I applied and got into PricewaterhouseCoopers and was working in risk assurance or internal audit. I'm actually a certified internal auditor. I loved that job because it taught me how to think about risk and control gaps, but didn't see myself doing that for 10 years plus. And then I was very fascinated with urban planning, so I ended up going back to school. I went to MIT and pursued a master's in city planning, and then moved to Houston, which funnily enough has no zoning. And I worked as a planner there for 2 years. Again, I loved it, but just by way of being in the energy capital of the world, you sort of get sucked into energy. Oftentimes, I was the only person at a dinner party that wasn't in energy. But then Greentown Labs opened up their Houston site, and Greentown Labs is sort of like the first-of-a-kind climate incubator that allowed a lot of the incubators in the space, like Climate Haven, to sort of pop up after their success. And I worked in partnerships there for 3 years. And Cycles was a member, or is a member of Greentown Labs, so was Fervo Energy. And from there, I noticed like my biggest gap in my CV was operational experience. I didn't have a strong understanding of how a product was built or how a project was built. And I wanted to be in the room where those decisions were being made, but I didn't myself have the experience there. So I thought, what better way to do that than as a chief of staff? You get to be a fly on the wall, be supportive of the leadership team, but you're not directly making the decisions yourself. And so I've been with Fervo now 1.5 years, best decision I ever made, and I'll talk a little bit about that in my presentation. But before we dive into the Fervo's version of geothermal, I want to talk about traditional geothermal. So they're called hydrothermal. This is what you think of when you think of the geysers in California, when you think of Iceland. And effectively what it is, it's a hot reservoir near the surface that has water and naturally occurring fractures. So what you do is you drill one well at one end and you hope it touches a fracture, and you drill another well at the other end and you hope it touches a fracture, and then you inject water and it flows through, kind of like an underground radiator, goes up the production well, spins a turbine and creates energy. Now, this is great, but this is very geographically limited. So obviously places like Iceland or Kenya have an advantage, but at the same time, because you're not 100% sure of what the subsurface looks like, you don't know if you're going to hit the fracture. And so actually 1 in 3 wells drilled by conventional geothermal end up being dry holes, aka you've just spent millions of dollars on a well that you can't use. So very problematic. So what Fervo does, it actually takes a playbook out of shale, the shale revolution, oil and gas, and what we do is we drill a doublet, which is an injection and production well. We go vertically, and then we actually drill horizontally. We then hydraulically fracture to engineer those fractures there. And so effectively, we eliminate dry hole risk. We still inject water. It still heats up, it goes back to the surface, but Fervo uses something called an organic Rankine cycle turbine, which effectively is a closed-loop, zero-emission turbine. So everything that is injected is recycled and reused, and we have a very low percentage water leak-off rate, and we have 0 emissions in the process. Now, Fervo was started in 2017, and I think a lot of just life is a confluence of hard work and good luck. And we de-risked geothermal at a time when power demand is surging. And people are very interested in specifically firm baseload power, which is effectively power that is on 24/7. A lot of the hyperscalers that are driving that growth still have climate commitments. And so geothermal is such an excellent solution because it addresses both of those. And so when we think of what conventional geothermal currently has online, which is roughly 4 gigawatts, 0.4% on the US grid. The technology that Fervo uses actually unlocks thousands of gigawatts. And now this map is more red towards the western US, and that's just based on depth. So this is looking at 5 kilometers deep. What's the temperature look like there? And for example, Fervo's ideal temperature is between 400 to 450 Fahrenheit. But if we go deeper, let's say 10 kilometers, we can actually unlock a lot of this map. So effectively, geothermal is no longer geographically constrained. And that's incredible. But how do we know that it's going to work like we think it is? Effectively, because we tried it. We had a commercial pilot with Google that we launched in 2023. It remains today to be the most productive enhanced geothermal project in history. And what we did was we actually went to an underperforming conventional geothermal plant, and we told them, hey, no cost to you, but let us drill like the doublet that I talked about. And if it works, we'll sell you the brine. If it doesn't, no loss at all to you. And because they had PPA obligations and they were underperforming, they agreed to it. And Google's like, we're going to buy that power. And so we did it, and it was successful. And what the graph to the left here shows is specifically our midterm production profile. So for the initial 12 months that RED was online, not only were the wells as hot as we said they were going to be, but they stayed hot. And so this actually de-risked the technology to make way for our big first of a kind, which I'll talk about in a second. It also proved that there was a market for the electrons that Fervo generated. So having Google as an off-taker was immensely helpful for a lot of our investors to understand that there's someone who's going to procure this power. We were also validated at a technology readiness level 9 after this pilot, which was also very, very crucial for us. So we decided to more than 100x our pilot plant, which was 3.5 megawatts. We're currently building 500 megawatts in a place right outside of Milford, Utah, small town, 1,500 people, and we have 100 megawatts coming online next year and 400 megawatts coming online in 2028. So I'm going to show you a few photos because I think one of the benefits of having steel in the ground and an active project is being able to showcase all of this. So what you're seeing behind me is a cross-flow test. So think of it like a midway point to just check and confirm that the resource is actually as hot and is flowing the way that you think it is. And for our first plant, Project Red, the one that we did with Google, one doublet, so one well pair, produced roughly 3.5 megawatts. This is producing 10 megawatts. So again, we tripled the productivity of our well going from our commercial pilot to our first of a kind. All this is just water, it's steam. And actually, when our power plant is built, you won't see any steam come out because, like I mentioned, it's a closed loop zero emission cycle. But this basically just validated that the wells that we were drilling were the right kind of wells in the right kind of places, giving us the right type of heat and the right type of flow. And so this was when we first broke ground on our power plant in October of 2024. This is what it looks like in October of 2025, if it'll load. There we go. And so when we're talking about speed to power, when we're hearing all these questions about how quickly can we get things online, and we're seeing that we can build a power plant that's nearing commissioning in 12 months, that's huge. Right? And we've been able to do it amongst administration changes, amongst tariffs, amongst a number of things. Again, just a very positive sign for a lot of our investors and a lot of our off-takers that this is coming online at the right time. And actually, all 500 megawatts at Cape Station have legally binding off-takes. So we've signed power purchase agreements for all 500 megawatts. And we're very excited about that. And one of the reasons that we've been able to do that, and I'll just touch on one avenue, is because we have come down the drilling cost curve extremely fast. So conventionally, people thought that drilling was the most cost prohibitive aspect of geothermal. We drilled our first 2 wells at Red in 70 and 59 days respectively. To date, we've drilled our fastest well in 16 days. So that's a huge amount of like cost saving. We've come down the cost curve 50%. We've saved time by up to 70%. And for those of you who are very familiar with like what it takes to rent out like an oil and gas rig and set it up, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? A week. And so being able to just make this faster and become more efficient is hugely, just means like we're going to be able to hit our CapEx goals at much faster returns. The last thing I'll say is we've built just like an incredible group of partners who really believe in Fervo and our mission. And geothermal is really lucky because we are, I will say, one of the few energy sources at the moment that both sides of the aisle can agree upon. It was funny when our co-founders started Fervo in 2017, they said we were bipartisan in the sense that no one knew what geothermal was. And now everyone really likes geothermal. And let's say the Democrats really like it because it's clean and it's efficient and it's the energy transition in action. And Republicans really like it because effectively you're using oil and gas techniques. The oil rig the rig that we used to drill, that used to drill oil rigs, and now it's drilling geothermal. A drilling engineer in an oil and gas company is a drilling engineer in a geothermal company. So there are all these parallels, and it's, of course, it provides firm power. And maybe just the last thing is, we have to mention AI somewhere. Fervo Energy is the largest geothermal leaseholder in the US. And we actually started buying land back in 2020. We used our Series A and Series B rounds to buy up all these geothermal leases. And so we're able to now confidently go to hyperscalers and say that our leases can align with where you want to build infrastructure. It makes a lot of sense because when we're talking about 5.9's reliability and availability, which is what a lot of data centers need, geothermal does work to provide that. And with that, I'll end and excited to get into the discussion.
Hello? There we go. Okay, so only one can be on at a time. Well, great. Well, thank you all so much. Fascinating presentations, and I'm also just glad to see the mix of business models, technologies that we have on stage, and I mean, even among two geothermal companies, very different geographies, very different kind of scales and approaches. So glad we can bring your perspectives together. I think one question that comes to my mind is just thinking about how to balance the degree of customization that may be required. Mike, I'm thinking about what you were saying about what enabled you to do this right versus then how do you take that and scale it? And then I'm thinking of, okay, nth cycle. You're thinking about how do you build something that's modular, flexible, such that you can, just replicate this. So would love to hear from the panelists on that and kind of the point at which, too, even going back to Fervo, okay, when do you go to, all right, you did 3 megawatts, and now you're going to 100 exit. Okay, well, what were the results and factors that kind of led you to believe it was the right time to do that and that it was right to go to 100x? So maybe, Mike, I'll let you start with this question, but would love to just drill down into this kind of customization versus then how do you scale it challenge.
I think the first thing is just education. We all talk about changing the infrastructure and all the need to decarbonize, lower costs, right? I think Connecticut, we were just talking before this, has the second highest energy costs on average in the country. Whatever it is, it's up there. And so just your operational costs need to be addressed. Keeping the lights on in an enormous place like this is a real challenge. So if you find some way of lowering the costs and decarbonizing, there's interest there, but people don't ask the questions. They don't know there's a solution out there. And we are a solution running around looking for people who don't really know that there is one. If I'm selling you a pair of Nike shoes, I say, here's the color, here's the size, this is what you can do with it. Okay, either like them or you don't. And I'm knocking on the door and saying, man, you're probably wasting money. You're throwing out an enormous amount of carbon in the air. And they're going, well, right, that's called running a school. But there's better ways of doing it. And so our first hurdle is always education. And it does get confused because oddly geothermal has two very different kind of meetings. Yeah, we're both drilling in the ground, but they're very different. One's producing energy and one is simply an efficiency play. So you could have the geothermal energy, the electrons coming from Fervo into Yale University and being used at PSEB in a more efficient manner, running these heat pumps. Education is the biggest one for us. And part of education is, I can tell you, I can give you graphs, you can talk to, our technicians, and you'll be blown away. That's great. No one really cares. They want to see projects done. And every one of us are so, you mentioned this, Nor, so benefiting from having completed projects, because I'm a salesman. I'm knocking on your door and saying, this is great. Well, go to the next university and say, how'd it work? Part of selling it here at Yale, we did a small project at Bard, but it was a really interesting integrated approach. It went very quickly and it was very successful. That's a data point they really need. You're not going to be that beta tester. You're going to go and say, I can do this only, tell my management only if I know it's going to work. And it is crucial. So education first, and having some form of pilots that actually make a difference. And that certainly seemed to make a difference with Fervo as well.
Yeah, I would echo the education piece. We spend a lot of time talking about, again, the challenge and then what our technology actually does and how it is different from a traditional refining system. I think the other piece that I would add to this is designing with these specific questions in mind for today's partners, for today's clients. So one of the things to our modularity piece, we know that when we look at innovative technologies, there is this massive question about technology risk. So the main, our secret sauce again is in the cell, but the rest of the technology that surrounds, that is our systems, the rest of the equipment and the pumps and the tanks and the infrastructure that our cells sit in is all off the shelf equipment. It's used in other sectors, has been for decades. So looking at what the market is concerned about right now and addressing those asks specifically in a way that allows us to meet the demand today, it's designing with those things in mind that I think really lets us scale these technologies quickly.
And I think I'll address the size of both our pilot and our first of a kind. So for our pilot, actually, we thought we were going to build a power plant as well, because Fervo builds, owns, and operates the geothermal development. But then one of our investors came to us and said, is there anything new or different about the power plant? And we were like, well, no, it's a standard organic rack and cycle power plant. And he was like, well, don't waste the valuable capital on something that's not going to be completely new for a pilot. Your pilot is you want to showcase that the new part of your technology is what works, and then spend the actual capital on like a first of a kind or a greenfield development. And so we went with that and we said, all right, we're just going to be doing the subsurface. And then when we moved to Cape Station, which is our 500 megawatt development, initially we were looking at maybe 40 megawatts, 50 megawatts, but the math wasn't adding up. Geothermal thrives at scale for geothermal energy, and we just weren't capturing those gains at such a small level. And so we were like, well, we have the acreage, we have the know-how, we think we can convince investors to join us on this ride, even if we more than 100 exit. And so that's the reason that we went so high, is because economically it wasn't feasible to go smaller.
Yeah, that's interesting. And the other interesting thing too, and just comparing Fervo and Brightcore 2 that I'm thinking about is, so there you're saying, Nor, that, you realize, okay, to start off, we don't have to do everything. We're just going to do this piece, get more data, and then build off there. And then Mike, hearing what you were saying earlier, you actually were realizing, oh, wait a minute, to do this right, we have to have this vertically integrated business model pretty early on, was kind of what I was hearing. So just a kind of interesting where it seems like I'm trying to draw generalizations out here, but oftentimes it's just very specific to the business strategy. One other question I want to ask is kind of this interplay between the macro and the local. So, loved what you were sharing, Ali, on the impact of macro markets, where commodity pricing is on what you're doing. But then also loved, Mike, you talking about the soil here in New Haven, right? And like really getting granular on that. So is that something that, maybe Ali, if you want to speak to that a little bit, is just how how do you think both at a macro scale and the trends impacting your business strategy while also being very specific and working with that, I think that the battery, scrap, feedstock in one specific location to kind of develop your project and business?
So I think it's helpful probably to talk about our demonstration facility in Ohio. And we are headquartered in Boston, Massachusetts, but our first kind of commercial scale facility is in Ohio. And we get a lot of questions about like, well, why would you do that? They're not close to each other. We fly people often between the two. But part of that was because there's a significant ecosystem of shredders in Ohio. So when we look at the carbon intensity of our system, part of that is we get to avoid the massive transportation emissions that the current supply chain has to deal with by shipping these materials all over the world, again, to Asian refineries. So when I think about the micro, it's site selection, it's feedstock selection, it's building for that specific economy and at the kind of local level that you're going into. But you might be selling into a global market, either on the spot market or to a global player who's looking to use these materials in their products that are going all over the world. And so we have to be able to balance both and hold these two things true at one time as we are developing projects. And again, to the education point, we have to bring our partners along with us. Like our business model is a tolling model for the most part. And the way that works is our partners are really the processors. So they own the feedstock and they own the offtake. And so as part of that, we have to be working with them to make sure that they are understanding exactly how we fit into their specific system while we are both navigating together these macro environments.
And so one other thing I'd like to circle back on, Mike, you put a teaser out for it on workforce development, but would actually like to talk about that now because I know Fervo is doing a lot there too. And this question of, how do you bring the oil and gas industry on board and invite them to the clean energy revolution? I think that's a really exciting opportunity. So Mike, do you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing there and what opportunities you see?
Sure. As I had mentioned, integrating this entire thing, you have the design down well. Now you realize we don't have the capability of executing particularly well. So then we did a lot of research, spent a lot of money putting together this fleet of rigs that it's a toolbox that can handle all the eventualities that we end up seeing. And it grows as we grow. The water processing was something that we added after understanding what the specific needs were here, and it'll be applied in other areas for sure. The problem is there's AI-derived algorithms and everything else on a lot of our O&M, but you need boots on the ground. You need people to run these things. And it's something that we're educating ourselves in the marketplace. There's not a lot of people that know how to do it. To be a master driller takes 5 years. So we can pluck people from oil and gas, and believe me, they're excited to go to a clean energy. It's the future. They feel good about what they're doing. But in the end, they still have to be really educated on how to do this. It's a highly technical, and really you don't want to get this thing wrong. And you almost have to take a step back in order to have the apprentice program and whatnot that is needed for the ITC, for the federal grants. You have to have people on board understanding this and being in the field learning. And we're a small company. We have 140 people. That's a huge responsibility for us to be growing our workforce, not just for our company, but we need people, smart people, capable people, excited people for the whole industry. And the whole industry needs it. And Yale's been really good about that. They're saying, well, look, we live in a community here. There's a huge need for jobs. How do we integrate with you guys? And it is a big, heavy lift, but an absolutely necessary one. In a selfish way, we need those bodies. The industry needs those bodies. So they're using their platform to say, okay, we have a lot of boreholes that need to be done. And we cannot, and any individual company in this industry cannot say, you know what, I'm going to spend the next decade working on workforce development because it's needed, and it is. I need contracted jobs to do it. And Yale's been incredible about that. They've been leading this. We had a sit down with the governor about 3 weeks ago trying to pull him in and say, what resources do you have? It needs money, and parties are willing to give it, but you need some leadership on the policy level too, and it's starting to happen in a big way because everybody wants jobs. But these things don't happen overnight. It's very, very specific. So it's an enormous need for us in a selfish way, but we want to see the industry grow too, and the competition is going to make us better. So heavy, heavy lift, but I think, before you get to that master driller, there's tool pushers and a lot of people down lower that are absolutely crucial, but you can have people come in that don't have that education and be making a good wage and having benefits and everything else working in the clean energy industry. So we want to grow this for all the right reasons on a personal level, but I think across a community like New Haven, it could really benefit locally. And, that is the thing. We are looking both kind of locally and across the world. We have a hard time plucking somebody out of Houston to come and say, hey, you want to work in the Northeast? It's just difficult in a young industry to do that. We have to find these workers locally.
Great to hear about those partnerships. And Noor, would love to hear a little bit from you too. Just what partnerships is Fervo working to create, and what have you seen in terms of workforce development?
Yeah, so Fervo was started, Tim and Jack, our co-founders, started Fervo out of Stanford, and then they quickly realized if they wanted to attract the right talent, they needed to move to Houston. So moved the company headquarters to Houston in 2020, 3 years after starting Fervo, largest concentration of engineers in the country, energy capital of the world. And so it made a lot of sense for them. So even though similarly to you, we're headquartered in Houston, our project's in Utah, we primarily did that for the workforce. And I think it was for us, 60% of Fervo is ex-oil and gas, and that's not just on the engineering side, it's on the finance side, it's on the communication side, it's on a lot of different parallels. And I think it's twofold. One, geothermal energy is nascent, yes, but it is not prone to the cyclical up and downs of commodity pricing. So you're not gonna have 1 year of 25% layoffs from a company in the geothermal space like you would in oil and gas. Two, I think specifically younger generations want to wake up feeling pretty good about themselves, but engineers in general, they want to solve interesting problems. And I think if you are building a company that's solving an interesting problem, put aside all the benefits. Yes, those are extremely important, but I'm sitting here talking to you wearing my Houston resident hat. I think it's more important to attract talent that is thinking about things critically, that want to work on hard problems, that see the benefits of this. And so we moved to Houston to address that, but then we're also building apprenticeship programs locally. So for example, we built the first geothermal apprenticeship program in Southern Utah University that effectively at the end will have graduated 150 people across five different verticals, including drilling, including completions, including well field development. And so we're trying to do it from the top down, but at the same time, address it locally from the bottom up.
I think the thing I would add that was true in both of these is leveraging existing talent for new purposes. So N-Cycle is doing a similar thing, but with mining expertise. So we have miners in our finance team and our engineering team. When we are building a facility, our team that is working with the EPCs, they're ex-miners. And so we're really looking at these kind of pools of talent that either have left the U.S. Or are pretty limited in the U.S. and exist elsewhere, and pulling them back into these interesting, hard problems. And we see the same thing. We see these engineers that are hungry to work on complicated, novel technologies, and really bring them to scale to, maybe rock the boat a little bit. So.
Great. Well, great to hear about your dedication to workforce development and education, especially here at a university who has a very similar mission. So great. Well, with that, we only have, I think, 10 minutes left here. I'd like to leave some time for audience Q&A. So would like to turn it over to Gentry. I believe she's been collecting questions. There we go. Okay. Yes. So yeah, if and now is a good time if you haven't already, if you have some burning questions you want to submit to the app, feel free to submit those, and she'll pull them up. Great. Hand it over to you.
Thank you. First question that we have is about navigating regulatory uncertainty in first-of-a-kind project development, especially in an uncertain policy environment. And I think that it's both at the federal level as well as state.
I mean, I sit here and geothermal is currently like the favorite child or, of the federal government right now. Maybe after nuclear. Nuclear is up there and then it's geothermal. But I think like a lot of relationship building early on like is extremely important, both at the local level. So like literally working with community members, our leadership team would go to like City Hall and attend meetings for Milford, which is a town of 1,500 people, and like work their way up and like talk to the Bureau of Land Management and sort of like figure it out from the ground up. And then at the same time, working really closely with people on the Hill and like thinking about, our priorities. So like, for example, I can tell you the One Big Beautiful Bill, when the House first passed it, did not include geothermal tax credits. Did not save the geothermal tax credits. Our team did a lot of work just like talking to multiple elected representatives about the importance of geothermal, about how widespread it would be, how it's really good for workforce, how it pulls from oil and gas, how it does all these amazing things. And then in the Senate, it actually ended up, they re-added the investment tax credits and the production tax credits for geothermal. And so I think but if we hadn't built those relationships beforehand, there is no way that we would have been able to do that.
Yeah, I think similarly, engaging very deeply at both the federal and state level. So we similarly have the benefit of being a favorite child right now in this administration, and I think a lot of what we're doing is just spending time educating on the specific levers that will unblock or unlock our scaling abilities. So adding in more of that price stability within the market and keeping feedstocks here domestically. We spend a lot of time kind of drafting policy or working with our Hill members to really make sure that the folks that are on these committees understand that there are technologies that are ready to scale given certain market conditions, and making sure that they are aware that we are an ally in their goals of workforce development, of bringing back these kind of industries that have left these particular locations, and really making sure that we're their ally as much as they are ours.
Yeah, I would echo that. I'm not sure we're the favorite child. We may be the orphan that they don't know they have. Because honestly, we were on Capitol Hill and we were doing a lot of lobbying, and it was actually fascinating to watch it. People had done a lot of work, Fervo included. And one chief of staff said, they don't have a distinction between what you are and what you're not. You're drilling, just keep your head down and it'll be okay. Thanks for getting into the weeds. So it really saved us in a way. We were coming up with this idea, but when you think about this, we are looking at 30% diminishment from the ITC. That applies to NGOs, schools, houses of worship and whatnot. And then another 10% for domestic adders. So you're talking about a 40% off the capital costs up front. It makes us competitive. It can be on par and sometimes even less than competitive, what you'd otherwise put in your building. So on a federal level, that was absolutely crucial. And honestly, I joke, but the process was amazing to go in there and say, look, this is not just about feeling good and decarbonizing. Maybe that's become politicized. This is jobs. This is domestic jobs. This is saving money for the people that put it in their buildings. And it's American ingenuity, right? And so there's a couple pillars here that are really important that come across the political spectrum. And I think you really have to nail that. And it'll just fall on deaf ears if it becomes politicized. The other thing is the utilities have been incredible. They've been incredible. Maybe I'm overstating this, but I have to say, we've been able to go to Con Ed in that picture that I was showing where we were drilling in the basement. They had a $500,000 grant for us there. They want to see this. Why? Because they're hitting capacity themselves, capacity issues. And what they don't want is a brownout. When there's not enough electrons in the middle of winter and grandma's freezing to death, bad things happen. So they're saying, well, if you're shaving that peak, we can get behind this without having to put in a whole new bit of capacity ourselves. It's the most efficient way to do that. So they've been incredibly creative. These ideas of these old kind of inertia-laden beasts that don't want to hear about new technology. It's not been our experience. we have a very good line to most of the Eversources of the world and whatnot. Say, hey, we're trying to do this at Yale. How can you help it? They're not going to put down $250,000 to do a study. Can you diffuse that a little bit so that they can get to a yes? These are enormous things. You don't do the study, you don't do the project. And if I'm on the other end of that transaction, someone tells me I'm going to have to pay $100,000, and the answer may be no, the thermal conductivity of the ground's not good, I'm not doing it. So you really need all these stakeholders to be totally engaged from the federal level all the way down, and we've been lucky enough to have that.
Thank you. Next question is, what surprised you about working in first-of-a-kind projects, and what drew you personally to this work?
I could start. So I didn't do as much on my background, but very briefly, I came from a corporate sustainability background. So I was working at and with large companies doing carbon inventories, low carbon transition planning, and carbon accounting advocacy work. And what I found was it was just a very retroactive process. We were looking at what happened last year and maybe making some small tweaks on a plan that's been around for a couple of years and really just trying to kind of measure that process. And so I decided, look, I need to go back to grad school. I need to get more involved, and I need to figure out exactly how I need to get involved. So I spent my time actually here across the street at the School of the Environment, exploring basically different industries, different sectors, and then also how exactly I wanted to be involved. So I spent time in both of these buildings a bit, but I decided that I really wanted to do operations at a startup because it was going to let me get my hands really dirty with getting one of these technologies to scale. And so the way that I found my way here is just, we need these things, we need them quickly, and we need them all over the world. And so it's going to take everybody bringing these types of creative solutions to really do that.
I'll answer the most surprising part is, I think just how quickly decisions are made when you're building a first of a kind. I think oftentimes, like coming from the corporate world, you have to go through all these structures and you sit through and there's a committee and then they agree on something and then you double check with another department. Like at Fervo, it's literally like a meeting and then they're like, all right, this is what we're going to do next. And I was like, oh my God, that's it? And they're like, yep, that's it. Like, let's go do it. And it was very surprising. Part of that's startup, first of a kind stuff. Part of that's culture. And I loved that because why not just go? And I think someone told me when I first started the job, just keep going until someone tells you stop. So just go do, and then if you've gone too far, someone will tell you stop, and then you stop, but just keep going. And I think that's amazing.
I guess what attracted me was just a sense of urgency, right? I mean, it's the challenge of our time. I graduated as an undergrad after my first career, and I was old. I would love to have gone to school forever, but you feel like you want to make a difference. You'd like to actually contribute to society in some positive way, and there's these yawning opportunities, and you're saying, well, yeah, you're going to have to take a risk, and I totally hear you because there is no playbook on a first of its kind. How do you do this? Oh man, we thought we were going to do it this way. If we don't pivot, we're going to miss the boat. And so, what you're trying to do is, and speaking of boats, I mean, we have this massive inertia in our system. And you're saying, hey, I got an idea that's going to turn this big beast around. It's really hard. So get used to banging your head against the wall. But I have to tell you that it's the most gratifying thing in the world because you're trying to change the world for the better. And you're going to run into a lot of challenges for sure. But, how many days do you have left? Figure it out as much as you can and put new, better ways of doing it. Our old operating system has to be upgraded.
I think, and I'll jump in here too, and love what you all are saying. Deeply resonates. I think, working on first of a kind challenges, whether that be technologies, business models, financing mechanisms. I think there's this special kind of combination of creativity, breaking down silos, and just bias for action and being very outcomes oriented. That is just magnetic and brings together people who are also excited by that energy. So I'm sure we have a room full of people who share that same feeling and really excited to kick off this conference and hopefully meet many of you. So I think with that, I'll wrap up the panel if everyone will join me in a round of applause.